Stephanie, is there a way we can cover this like bulb? Like the bulb, it's very like harsh, like right there. Yeah. Okay.
Nice. What's
Okay, great. Can you hear me? Yes. Yay, okay, great. Welcome. Thank you everyone for coming. It is my great pleasure to welcome and introduce friends and colleagues, Nima Javidi and Behnaz Assadi of Jah Architecture Studio. They're up there. I told them to wait up there until I finished introducing them. For those of you who are tuning in through YouTube, we are all squeezed into a pit at Kosanti at the CatCast building. CatCast was named after the caterpillar that originally constructed the earth cast roof of this building. So that's where the name CatCast comes from. And of course, these renovations of Kosanti have been taking place with the help of Mac McDonald and Alex Martinick. Where's Alex? Oh, the lighting is a little uneven. Yeah, okay. Yeah, so Alex is a second-year student I'll stop there. So tonight kicks off our spring lecture series, and it's the second TSOA event of the semester, following our John Lautner, Perlman Cabin, and Wallstrom residence exhibition reopening at Architecton. And for those who haven't seen it, please go. It's open till March 31st. And tonight we host the first of a double feature lecture pairing by Ja and with Jimenez Lai of Bureau Spectacular, who's also in the audience, who will be presenting tomorrow. And we're very excited to have both of these lectures back to back at our school. I've informally named this pairing Familiar Encounters, describing another convergence of Ja Studio and Bureau Spectacular as friends and colleagues from Toronto, another overlap with the school in one way or another, and an ongoing dialogue of bodies of work that have developed over the years and to come. With Matthew Shaw and Carson Chan coming up as the second double feature lecture in March, our lecture series will be officially 75% Canadian. So Ja Architecture Studio is a practice based in Toronto and led by an Iranian-Canadian duo, an architect and a landscape designer, that combines the rootedness of a local architecture firm with the broad interests of an international design studio. The studio's work invests in larger questions of the discipline, namely how iconographic, geometric, formal, and tectonic pursuits relate to broader contexts such as contemporary art, politics, construction, landscape, and urbanism. In the spring of 2022 last year, we opened Organic, an exhibition that invited a range of new voices to interpret the word organic as it has been used in the field. Ja's proposal, Organic Sway, took a deep dive into the history and legacy of this term as it was used between Wright and Sullivan, with Nima proclaiming that he had become a Frank Lloyd Wright historian, which was really great. We're so glad you could finally join us in person tonight, and thank you so much for agreeing to lecture with us. Thank you. Let's give them a round of applause.
Are we good?
Yes.
So thank you so much for the invitation, and we are super happy. Usually we like to talk about our work, but this setup is so amazing, and the moment we saw it, we thought this is perfect. This is really amazing, and our lecture is called One-to-One, and we talked, and essentially it's about a mode of practice, and it's always a challenge how, when you want to look back at 10 years of your work, and how to create a linearity of slides that talk about your projects. Where is the question of where to start? And we thought we should start exactly from 3/4 in, from the start of the moment we started our practice, and that moment would be the exhibition that we did at the Cooper Union in 2019, right before the pandemic. And we thought, our projects express our interest in certain themes in architecture. Our mode of practice is more about how we strategize our efforts to get those interests outside to the, into the real world. And that's really what the focus of that exhibition was. And we are part of the generation that we started our practice right after recession. And that the post-recession groups, I think there's a group of us, and we all share the sentiments of starting from almost ground zero, and it had a kind of it was scary, but at the same time it was open to doing the things that you thought was right, and we thought for that exhibition, after 10 years being in practice, the objects in our studio and the space of our studio carried most of the important registers of our mode of practice. And we thought the best thing is to talk about our mode of practice. So the exhibition was called One-to-One, and essentially we unfolded the walls of our office in Toronto, and we placed it on the walls of the third floor gallery at Cooper, and created a one-to-one overlay of photographs of one space onto the walls of the other. As you can see, the top is our office. Basically, we unfold it and we place it exactly onto the spaces, to the space of that hallway gallery. One space in Toronto, Canada, the other at Cooper Foundation Building in New York with its rich history. And after placing the images of our space onto that space, we took a few critical objects like the sawhorse on the left and a working drawing set that we liked and a few other objects, and we placed them exactly both as basically to register the one-to-one scale of the object to the image that was in the space. And transposing the surfaces of one space onto the other happened on all walls of the exhibition. And its best moment, there was kind of conflations of not just the design objects over their images, but the adjacencies and overlap of objects of everyday life of one space, like the fire alarm of the Cooper Gallery hallway next to the thermostat of our office. And it brought about this notion of the relationship of the one-to-one relationship of the core of our interests, which is how we, the things that we teach and the things that we learn and how we can navigate them into almost another space and the world, if you will. And of course, windows and views played, added a depth, which was interesting, and to the exhibition. And I think this video, which is a casual pan shot of the space, shows you how multiple depths and multiple conflating reciprocities between an object and its image, the light of one space, the light of the space of the photograph, the depth of one picture versus the depth of the space that you see when the door was open, and even the normative objects like the doorknob of one space next to a similar object in our office, and we thought there was something about that one-to-oneness which really worked as part of the experience of that exhibition. And the most important thing about this exhibition was, to our mind, we thought our mode of practice is registered in the ratio of the objects in the office, and nothing can substitute that. You've practiced for 10 years, those objects, the ratio of drawings versus the models versus letters, that's the core of our practice. To characterize, the best thing is to just represent the one-to-one image of it over the corridor of Cooper Union Gallery.
Oh, sorry. Okay. So as part of the exhibition, we had a series of manifesto text that explain some of our interests and more critical thinking behind our practice, which hopefully was evident in our work as well. And all of them started with the prompt and one-to-one, so there is a one-to-one. So there is a one-to-one relationship between the place of our practice and the location of our projects. We mostly build in the same neighborhood that we choose to live and work. We like it for the same reason we like to participate in its regeneration. We learn from its subtleties, its multiple histories, neither of which are so dominant to be forced to follow or too benign to ignore. They are the experience of North American cities at its best. One-to-one is the physical register of immigration, of being slightly off from the context that you aspire to fit within, struggle with, and eventually change by the virtue of having lived there. And I think perhaps our very own office stands as a true testament to this. So here is the office. It is a corner lot storefront in downtown Toronto in a West Queen West neighborhood, Beaconsfield Village. And this is basically the shell that inside of it was the walls that we unfolded for that exhibition. And at the very back of the project, we're adding an addition that is, the gross floor area allowed by zoning for the ADU was not enough for a living space, but it was just enough that works as an addition at a distance for the main building that was there, which is the office. So the rituals and objects of our life and work kind of dispersed along through the backyard to the unit in the back. There is an above ground and underground connection to parts of each one of the two buildings, and we called the project one-to-one. And this was exactly during COVID, and I think it was in ways thinking and dealing with the spatial realities of COVID, that blurred boundary of work and life that we as architects are very familiar with, that fuzziness between working and living. So this is the project as it stands at the end of the lot, with a laneway separating it from the building behind, and you see the sunken basement with that ocular building window looking to the space below. And this is the window of our model shop currently. That's me making a 1-to-10 model of the project in the same space that the project will occupy. And this is the back of our office. The office is a very simple gabled 2-story light wood frame building cladded in a very ugly brick that we painted white immediately. The only thing we did was we added that one window, which is basically a short door that created the visual connection between the two, all the openings in the two buildings. And the idea is was a parallel between the two buildings, as well as a parallel between two modes of construction. So the one is the definition of balloon light wood frame construction, flushed at grade, linear wood members, studs, joists, rafters. And the other one is dimension lumber consolidated as tectonic plates that are stacked in different angles and configurations. And rotation of a series of, you can see here in the plan is very visible, rotation of series of structural plates within the orthogonal logic of a shell. And here is the 1-to-10 model, in the very space that it was built, which is the site for the project. The foundation is just fresh out of formwork, as you can see. And that cantilevered edge that you see goes through the backyard and registers the main floor of the building, and it also becomes the threshold where the two hybrids meet, the wood part and the concrete. And this is a series of images of the assembly of the parts. So the concrete foundation, the placement of the stair inside, the CLT walls on the edge of that edge, and then the interlock of the oblique structure of the second floor plates, as well as the roof beams as one component on top of the CLT walls. And then the roof, which is this light wood frame cage, shrink wraps the CLT structure inside. And then lastly, this image, I always put it in because we like this image a lot. It looks like an exquisite corpse where one of the authors becomes part of the game. So it's a concrete base, a mid-level CLT body, and my head.
It's me?
Yeah.
Yeah, so from there we go to the neighborhood. And when we look back at it, basically much of our recent work all happens in one neighborhood in Toronto, Queen West in Toronto. And one of the things that after looking at all of them, sometimes you think the whole set of projects are basically responses to one prompt. Most of them are located on lots between 20 feet to 25 feet of frontage and 50 feet of building depth. And this tight constraint has forced us to operate on the space between the efficiency of a familiar type and the unique urban conditions offered by the site to reinvent the type. This tension between the architecture and the city, the inside and the outside, and the private and the public is typically mediated through the type, number, configuration, and location of the stairs in each project. And it's highlighted in this drawing. And so, for example, in this one, it's an octagonal ADU with the tail that finds the address on the front of an existing lot with the Victorian building that is an existing building. And essentially, it's a line that folds onto itself along the two triangular stairs. And it's a moment where the architectural promenade becomes the architecture itself. It's a house, the path is the house. And we created a wall along the laneway that was running along the house, and that's that wall. And this is the view of the octagon from the laneway. And we opened the kitchen to that laneway to act both as a kitchen for the house, but also potentially as a community kitchen for the neighborhood. Or there's another project that we found. We noticed that between the building and the next door, there is a gap, and that became the opening line of the project. We added 3 small stack units, staggered and slightly shifted. In the back, that they were getting south exposure, and they were basically capturing light in the back, but they also created a kind of public promenade. This was a mid-lot, in the middle of the block, and we created a public promenade from the front to the back of the block, and actually the bar on the ground floor was very popular because they closed the front door and everybody liked to go to the back just to experience the entry from the back. And this is its expression on the street. You barely notice them, but you can see the 3 staggered units on the side. And the idea of the houses were simple. Just you stack 3 rituals of life on top of each other with, one run of stair stacked on top of itself. This was an exploration of using scissor stairs with this, slightly tilted scissor stair, and a narrow, again, mews or laneway that we found on the edge of the property. That was a public thoroughfare, and we used it to create a kind of a multi-unit building using the multiple, entries to that, and also 2 access to the basement. So it's a very compact way of creating 6 units within one shell. And as you can see, it's a slightly noticeable in the neighborhood, but this is in Toronto, that neighborhood is trying to add to its density. Everybody's trying, and the question is, how can you do it? And our effort was, how can you stack having back-to-back units, but at the same time find ways of getting cross ventilation across. So units that have both front and back access. And this is the geometry of one of the units that gets interlocked around the scissor stair that is right in the middle. And we just basically kind of a blank facade with the chamfered edge that registers that walkway on the edge of the building, and that would take you to the entry in the middle. Or this one, the other projects, all of them, they have won either PA Awards or Canadian Architect Award, but this one didn't win anything. But we really like it because it was the idea of how you take a corner lot, an existing building on a corner lot, and gradually adding a series of additions to the back that keeps tapering towards the end. And the last one, it creates in Toronto, we don't know how to return the corner, you can't turn the corner because houses are kind of arrayed along an edge, and the moment you reach a perpendicular street and create a corner, this house has an exposed backyard. So the backyard of the last house is exposed. So this was an idea of how you can create a series of units in the back with individual entry, but the last one becomes a very narrow wall that is only there to capture light to the basement, which you take over that territory, but at the same time becomes a wall for that block. And we used the same slate shingle of the house and cladded the whole thing, and that's that thin element that you see. And essentially, when it gets to the basement, it widens, and that's the space where it is. The rest of it is capturing the light, and it's also extending the trope that we kind of incorporate for the other units. And we also love these tectonic models. We think no mode of construction is pure, and it's usually hybrid. And we like the idea of how even the simplest houses are a hybrid tectonic of 2 things, usually an inverted bowl, and that on top of it sits a kind of a clean light wood frame structure. And that hybridity is very interesting. This is another project, same theme. The lot is very odd, and we wanted to create a side addition to an existing house, but we thought instead, how can we create a tangential line that the addition and the house only meet on one point? And in reality, the moment you give thickness to things, that thickness produces a kind of a threshold between one space and the other. And it was for a chef that wanted, one of our clients, is a chef, and he wanted to have a commercial kitchen in the basement with a sunken backyard. And we wanted to basically enter from the front, go on the path below the grade to that sunken yard. So you have essentially 2 bridges. One goes below grade, the other one is perpendicular and goes over. And you can see in this section how we get light to the house, and that falls exactly where the circulation is, and it takes you up. So it's a project that in plan and section you can clearly see the whole idea. And this is the expression of the project on the street, and that's the passage that runs to the sunken backyard. And that's the backyard. You can see the passage, and you can also see the stair that is going up with the light that is captured through that. And this was also published. I mean, we won PA Awards and Canadian Architect, and we also modeled all of those bricks. And,
we did. Someone did.
Yes, sorry. Kaveh Tahir is one of our best interns. With all of that, 3 weeks of doing that. And we still look at it, and every time, and this is on our way, our office is very small. Every time I go to the bathroom, this is sitting there. I always touch it and but this, now I'm going to talk about, a set of other projects and a theme in them which struggles with the way in which known formal repertoire of light wood framing, like gables, dormers, and roof geometries, can start to crossbreed with figures and icons non-native to them. This crossbreed tries to stay away from the explicit dualities of icon, facade, and space plan, much like this corner shot of Short Hill Casino by McKee Meet White, where the mismatch between the expression of the perfect gable on the top and how it sits on the kind of round corner of the plan, and then that mismatch is handled by delaminating the edge of the base and picking up the corner of that. And it all is part of the, our interest in the expressions that can be generated from light wood frame construction, and in our work, this relationship between the figure of the edge and the geometry of the space is quite important. And we call them spaces with deep profiles. And in some projects, they are pure non-structural surfaces nested within shed structures, and in others, the edge frame becomes the structure. So the frame is part of the structure. In some cases, the relationship goes even further and becomes the formal expression of the exterior. Also, the interior organization is triggered by the configuration of the stair, so everything becomes tied together. And that's a shot of 44 Fox Street that I'll show you. And this is the moment that the plan is kind of being implicated in the operation between the facade. The stair configuration is basically triggering all the moves. And it was an idea of creating a relationship between a building and an ADU in the back, and how can you create some kind of formal reciprocity, as you can see in this diagram. One of them is slightly smaller, so it's not a quite equal courtyard. One of them is slightly smaller, but how can you create some kind of formal reciprocity between the two? So we use the angle of the stair to kind of register formally the two geometries. And the question of thickness, when you're dealing with thicker cladding, how can you use that edge profile to sometimes extend the structural plate to incorporate the thickness of the future brick that would be cladding, and how you can get crisp edges if you want to create a kind of expression of thinness.
That was a one-to-one mock-up of that.
Yes.
On the.
So that was the one-to-one mock-up, and this, the corner building that Behnaz showed. Sometimes we are doing this neighbors thing. They panic, and that's a mock-up that we just do it right on the front. And interns go out, and we go there, and we start doing this, and they always look at us as like crazy culty people. And this is that kind of relationship between the window of the main building towards the ADU in the back. And these are some recent shots of the building, finished and photographed by Felix Machat. And you can see the relationship between the dormer and the stair, basically how they meet, and that fading crease line on the left of the ensuite is that basically the wall of the stair meeting the extension of that dormer, and it fades into that geometry, and you can see that stair. And this is the fabric. This is the kind of offness that we are talking about. There's not a dominant language in the context, and you want to go there, and we really like the blankness of the next door neighbor that we had a party wall. And we wanted to extend that language into our architecture, and also then add these kind of not, things that were non-native to the language of the neighborhood. And that was the starting point, but this is the kind of changing neighborhood, so at some point it backfired, and somebody else bought that property and started taking it over. And really, we spent so much time on edge profiles that they just made a smaller version, fix it. And people pass by and say, oh, that's by one person. But it's part of what we like about that. There is not a preciousness to the architecture, you're part of the array. And this is the one that we did. We took the angle of the mansard roof, and we blend. Mansard roofs are kind of unique because they are not roofs. They are kind of slanted walls, and they're just creating space on the top floors of buildings. And they want to kind of give the impression of a roof. And we kind of blended it with the wall, but it's the same language of the buildings that you see on the side. But we also rotated it and created kind of a wall of privacy for the space. But again, it's all about adding to the density of the neighborhood. And this is a kind of front sunken yard that would give direct access to a separate unit in the basement. And then this one, which is about adding a two-story addition onto a single-story bungalow, and creating two nested outdoor space that along a pentagonal stair, they were kind of part of a component that were inserted onto that bungalow, and you can see the quality. This was a very shallow lot. It always comes from the urban aggregate and what the problem of the lot that we find the potential. This was a very shallow lot, but was wide, and we thought we can create outdoor spaces within the body of the building. And this one, it's about how some of the very important spaces. This is Penn Station in New York. During the demolition, you realize some of our understanding of space is always the membrane of the space, but it's not always the structure. And we love that shot. And this is the similar thing that we did for a baker in Toronto. We nested a kind of a shell within a kind of shed. And we created the original. This was a mechanic repair shop, and we just used the original garage doors and created these windows that would intersect with that. And that's the experience of that. A building has a major setback, and it has an odd relationship to the street, and those are the framed edges. And we used the same tectonic, and we brought it into basically the interior fit outs. And we used the thin shell and addition of solid maple just to have one language between the architecture and the pieces. And this is another one. It's called. What is it called? Underscore gallery. Underscore project is essentially a combination of a gallery at grade, a bar in the back, an artist residency in the middle, and I think an extension of the gallery in the very end of the building. And we used a simple motif that, because we kept the two existing walls, we created three elements. Two of them, as you can see on the front. One of them was a skylight in the back that registered the relationship of the lot to the oblique condition of the street, and essentially that is perpendicular to the street. So it's a very odd subdivision of lot, and when you go to that back gallery, you would see that again, that one of our motifs that now this time horizontally sitting as a skylight, but it always, when you're in the space, it registers the oblique nature of the street that you're unaware of when you're in this space, and that's the shot of that space, and that's that's the direction of the perpendicular to the direction of the street, and that's the grid essentially. And this is some shot. Okay. And this is, or is it me? That's me. Okay. So this interest in Lightwood frame became, we thought that there's so much richness in it, and we did a project that is called Boring Lightness for a Venice Biennale for Canadian Pavilion, and became a finalist. Didn't win. Twice finalist, never won. But it was the idea of how it was boring because Lightwood frame is a kind of normative and boring, and you don't think there's architecture expression there. And lightness was the fact that it was very light, and at the same time we liked the idea of boring these cylindrical cuts out of existing buildings. We asked architects to do that, and one of the architects in Canada to do that, and basically pick a historic site and give us a bore of it. And all of our interest was generated, has been triggered by writings of Vincent Scully, and both to understand the history of it, but also at the same time to enjoy it architecturally. And of course, one of the best, and you know, Venturi brought it, you know, stripped it out of some of its stylistic tendencies, and as you can see, the expression of Leap House is always, I love the gap at the bottom because you see the concrete piers that hold it in the air, and there is something fantastic about the physical lightness of it, and the fact that it can be transported to a new site. And this was a quarter-inch model of the project that we wanted to show to the jury that the experience of there is something about being in a very house that is built in this method, which is about movement and getting a sense of it's a kind of sense that if you've lived in masonry buildings, you would never understand how light the structure is.
Is it not playing?
It seems like the codec is unavailable.
Does it show something?
No, I have it. Do you want to show it?
Sure, yes.
Sorry, Stephanie, I'm going through your stuff.
No worries. It's not being streamed.
It's just catfish.
That got streamed.
Oh, come on. Okay. It's doing something weird, but it's doing it.
Very good at this. Very good.
Let's see.
Very
I don't
good.
know.
It's not working.
It's not worth it even. But it's
Cancel, cancel.
okay.
I think it's nice.
Yeah, maybe.
Oh, don't spoil it.
It was worth it, I guess. The jury really loved this. Okay, so where were we? Okay. Okay. Okay, so one of my favorite ones of the manifestos was actually this one. One-to-one reinforces scalelessness of geometry. Different scales of drawings and models of our work are present as objects unto themselves. Their diversity reinforces the presence of geometry as a main theme of our practice. Geometric relationships goes beyond the regulating logic across different scales of one project and becomes the generative engine creating cross-links, contaminations across different projects of very different contexts. Objects of our work tend to sit well next to each other. They are strangers unaware of their genealogical links. And for that, we thought we'd show you two of these unaware strangers, partly to talk about the relevance of geometry in our work, and partly to bring up the importance of architecture competitions and the unfortunate thing that we see less and less of those in North America for public buildings. So this is our proposal for Bauhaus Museum in Dessau. It was like a two-phase competition, a large international competition. This is a table of our iterative studies of the museum. The competition was supposed to be for a museum that was supposed to show Bauhaus work for the 100-year anniversary of the museum. I think we won 4th place here. Our proposal was to create two stratas, one on the main floor that was about the city and the park, and the second one that was a permanent exhibition where the reciprocal structure of the pitched roof created different exhibition territories underneath it. And you can see some of our similar interest here again. Interest in the tension that is caused by packing or orthographic geometry within a polygonal shell. I think, in ways, I think this is very similar to Gropius's challenge to contain centrifugal diversities that he intended within one single shell, which was the school. This is another one. These are all, for some reason, very low res now, but
No,
they're good?
good
Okay.
guys.
So the second one is our proposal for Kaunas Concert Hall in Lithuania, which is a pure pentagonal outside shell, registers the existence of two concert halls within by varying gently the slope of the roof towards two raised corners. The site was amazing. The site was along the river where the river separates, and the river fluctuates. As you can see, most of the site is underwater. So the site plan was exciting because we had to design a site plan where it was functional in different water tables, so that we had a public space that is always active at some point in different levels of water. And then the interstitial space between the two concert halls became the important processional space between the halls. And it was like the space for the city. And here's that processional space. Which brings us to landscape. So the history of landscape is a history of contradictory forces: nature versus human, native versus non-native, spontaneity versus control, interconnected systems versus forces of fragmentation. And in all of these dualities, there exists a threshold that lies between the two, doesn't belong to either of them, but is impacted by both. And that's where our interest in ecology and landscape lies. That space where unpredictability of ecological processes meets the abstraction of urbanity, where our understanding of third landscapes meets the poetics of terrain vague. So these thresholds come in different scales, and we're interested in all of those scales. So this is a large scale one. This is a competition we did in Lima, Peru, where a thin ecological membrane or a buffer that contains an archaeological site. This was all archaeological site within, and a historic fabric on the outside. This was interesting because this was a very arid site, but then it contained the largest freshwater table underneath. So I think the threshold was also in the section. This third landscape here becomes the link that connects pockets of ecology, ecological systems, climate, water, flora, fauna. What we designed was basically a series of architectural interventions along a looped promenade, ecological promenade, and then there were wind towers that were placed on top of the wells that connected to a qanat system, which was called pukios there. We called it qanat in Iran, which is a traditional system that brings water from underground just using gravity, so you don't need anything else. So these wind towers registered that system, and the water was tapped in for irrigation. The small scale, the leftover patches of green in urban context, that leftover land that is protected by city bylaws and encroached upon by the developments. Our office's side yard is one of these small patches. These are interconnected yet fragmented networks of ecological systems where a change to the ecological makeup of one of these potentially can change that of an entire neighborhood. So in this image, you see the white lines. Those white lines are a grid system that we laid across our office's side yard. It's actually a very old technique. It's called the quadrant technique. It was developed in 19th century by this ecologist F.E. Clement, I think. So we laid this, 300 of them, squares on the side yard of our office, and we systematically documented the change over time. And of course, we're still doing it, so I'm hoping we would continue to do that. And I should mention that the vegetation that you see there are all spontaneous. We call it spontaneous. Our neighbors calls it weed. They're not very happy about our little experiment here. We're the Kosante of our neighborhood. We're curious. But the yard is also the threshold where our one-to-one material explorations and mock-ups meets our landscape interests, and we gradually push them into our projects. Like this one, which you just saw, and Nima showed 44 Foxley. That is like an urban yard again, the threshold between permeability and impermeability, biotics and abiotics, and a moment of spontaneity on that side, which is the first sprout of spontaneous plant growing in that blurred boundary, and we were very excited about it. So one more large project, the third landscape that lies along a railroad corridor in Toronto, Metrolinx, for those of you who don't know. This is a railroad that connects, or supposed to connect, that's an expansion, right?
Yes.
So it's supposed to connect the very eastern corner of the Greater Toronto area to the very western corner of it. So Exhibition Place to Science Center. And this is like a map that kind of registers the ecological makeup of that corridor. And our proposal was to use the same system to negotiate that threshold, the porous system that would define that blurred boundary and also soften the impact of the presence of sound barriers along the corridor that was most of the time elevated and was crossing along dense low-rise residential neighborhoods. And we think it's not a coincidence that our fascination with these landscapes, the third landscapes, coincides with that of good storytellers of the city, like Wim Wenders. So where he picks, Potsdamer plots as the backdrop for his fallen angels in the Wings of Desire. And if you haven't seen it, watch it. Or the vague threshold that nomad land underneath the massive infrastructure that you guys have a lot of, and like we saw it in Dallas, we saw it here. It's just like, which brings us to our most recent and last project of the day, the light grain. This project also recently won an award that will be announced in March. A site located along Don River. So Toronto has two ravine systems, Don and Humber, and both of them are kind of in many parts pushed to the thresholds by the forces of development, infrastructure and development. In here, that's Don River, that's the DVP, which is a massive highway that pushed Don to the side, and even they straightened Don in some parts as a result of it. So once again, the linear interstitial space along a major infrastructural corridor in the city, a leftover from once an interconnected ravine ecology, and the project's careful reuse of an existing residual ecology that suggests the potential to reframe an understanding of these leftover terrains without radically altering the nature of them. So a horizontal band creates a visual connection between two existing factory buildings, leveraging this underutilized gap as to create a sense of entry. Utilizing a threshold that is neither indoor, that's the threshold, neither indoor nor outdoor, neither insulated nor completely open, neither pure landscape nor pure architecture. This is that leftover land, that biodiverse, resilient landscape. And here, the generosity of the third landscape allows the accessibility not to become a requirement to satisfy, but the main expression of the project. So inside and over the entry, the space is covered by an open air structure, while the interior is a sawtooth roof punctured by large south-facing ocular skylights, which you can't see, but you see the light animating the space below. Mediating between the logic of the roof and roof overhead and the sweeping cut of the ramp is a single point of a column that marks that point of convergence. The column at the center of the figurative ramp supporting sister steel beams, allowing the roof's long span and relentless structural logic to generate an honest and workable tectonic. And here are some of our iterations for the roof. The roof spanned across that gap, but it was half covered and half not, so that the other half that was exposed would allow the existing spontaneous growth to continue to develop over time. And then on the interior, there was like minimal intervention on the space. We wanted to allow the residual history of the building to remain legible while also supporting the functions required. In this way, the building feels not like a finished project, but rather a work in progress, which I think it's the closest architecture can come to landscape. And here are some of the spaces that we like in the project. The easement on the side that was used for light service, now becoming a ground for a lush, spontaneous urban ecology, or the familiar North American typology of a long linear diner as a performance space for production. And lastly, a kitchen that extends over and looks over a dining hall and a cantilevered balcony, creating a reciprocity and immediate relationship between the rituals of baking and the rituals of eating. And well, while each of these components, like the chimney, the roof, the beam, the column, the ramp, has discrete logic tied to both its figure and function, they also contribute to the assembly as a whole that ties the two existing buildings together. And in the end, I would say that in the larger lens, the historic location of the two in relation to the major infrastructural corridor and the ravine has the potential to reframe our understanding of sites and how ecology is formed in the interstitial spaces. In a way, through imagining its potential, it suggests becoming part of a string of similar projects that, without radically altering the nature of these terrain vagues, brings them into our consciousness and enjoyment through meaningful uses. And lastly, would like to think that this project in ways highlights what we would see. We're hoping it would be more evident in our projects to come. A sense of reciprocity that comes from dealing with charged thresholds where tectonically raw architecture meets the spontaneity of ecology in these terrain bakes. Thank you.
How did we do on time? Too long? Good. An hour sharp.
Okay.
Very good. Thank you.
Any questions?
First of all, I absolutely love all of what it was really amazing. The third landscape I've never heard of before.
Oh, it's a term, it's not my term, it's a term coined by Gilles Clément.
Yeah. I grew up in third landscapes in Texas. Like the cities are just entirely third landscapes. So now I'm super happy to have this word now. But I think more so in the beginning of your lectures, it seemed like your works were like growing out of these existing conditions. And I couldn't really get a read on the relationship between the two entities. Like sometimes it seems like symbiotic, and other times it seems like a little antagonistic. And I was just wondering, like, what gets the process started whenever you're going to these existing conditions, like, or I guess like these kind of like these like older houses could be another type of third landscape. But, what are you looking for whenever you're on these sites? Starting like thinking about your sort of like takeover of them. What is the most generic?
Are you talking, because you started with third landscape and then
Yeah.
you went into
Yeah,
architecture.
I had
So
to say
I'm,
something about the third landscape.
you want to, I don't know if you want to know about what we think about disturbing the, like, I don't know whether you want me to talk about landscape or you want us to talk about architecture that we place on those sites.
The architecture. But I guess what it is
I'll chime in.
The boundary between them is so porous.
That's true. That's true. I mean, it's the good thing about showing your work through a kind of along its development. Not all of these themes were immediately related, and some of even the story of some of these projects is how to be having almost. Sometimes we take pride in having a kind of normative practice that people want to do something to their houses and they come to you. And even and I think this is the part that you can correct me. Behnaz also comes from the interest in landscape urbanism, which is usually happen. It needs a large site to be able to think. Almost ecological process. It takes a while, and I think these two projects are coming together. Once you realize actually ecological processes are not easily traced on a very small site, but you can actually see them across multiple small sites within the neighborhood, right? And how that in the last project we find a way of getting these interests to finally happen on one small property. So it's something that we are learning as we go forward. How to find tangency between interests that are not immediately there. And as you work, you find, this can work here. And that's the part how they're kind of merging.
Sorry, so almost continuing off what he asked. It seems like with a lot of these renovation projects, or like the houses that
Yes.
you've adjusted within Toronto,
Yeah.
you're using the vernacular of the houses around it, but you're also very much going right up, like you're throwing it out the window, and almost within the house sometimes you have like the bottom layer which continues on and the top layer which doesn't, and so you're pushing against the neighborhood around it, but you're also trying to grow it out. What point do you draw the line, or how do you understand that like this? There's some parts that need to continue, and there's some parts that need to antagonize for it to grow, for you to be able to grow the language of the neighborhood. How do you make that decision between we're going too far or we're not going far enough? Or
one good thing is to there are certain tropes in architecture that are kind of exhausted. One is this relationship between old and new, and And we've seen many of it, and every time it happens within the every time it expresses the binary nature of that, it seems to fail. So we like these neighborhoods mostly because they are kind of normative. They have an existing language. It's not a completely Victorian neighborhood. You have offness constantly. And we also like to, and the idea of how you work within a context, I think it comes from urbanity, which is the tightness, for example, in those, you're forced to relate. So you can be extremely off the context, you're forced to relate. The relationship between the entry and how you place a building within a lot, the typology of things is already determined. And you have a very tight constraint to operate against. So being against is good. You're already within a fabric that is set, the logic of it. And if you can find a way that you're building, if you pass by, you're not quite sure that if it's a very intentional move. Like we like those off conditions that stay away from, this is a modern thing next to an old thing. Like it's much more varied in reality.
And I think just because you guys are in school and it's part of it is learning, right? It's not like we've always been spot on. Like we've done our very first project. Like it's about, even we're very careful with the neighborhood that we pick. We only build in almost one neighborhood because it's familiar. What I said, we relate to it. The very first project that we built, which we sold our house and we invested in it, was in the wrong neighborhood, and it didn't work. But we learned from that. Like, so part of it is also learning. It's not like we're not gods.
So that's actually what I was going to ask, was how you got started, and because your brand and your point of view seems very strong and very it's very clear, your point of view now. But what was that process when you first started your practice? Like, did you have to just do some,
Just one.
Just one.
That was that. Then
That was
we
the
kind
one.
of got the.
But it was the one that we had, because when we started our office, it was post-recession.
Mm-hmm.
We opened an office, because some people open their office when, at the best moment, they leave a practice and it has a different momentum. We opened our office when we were tired of work. It was a moment that we were questioning so many of the things that we were very interested in. We wanted to practice them the way we wanted to. And we didn't have any client like many other architects, so we sold our apartment. We started building a project, and it's not about building. We had to always consider the reading of the public of our building or future, and at some point that thinking became tiring. We weren't that successful in it at all, but we wanted to be a kind of balance between old and new. Like, how can we be the nice modernist building within a kind of established neighborhood? And it failed. Everybody, and we realized it doesn't work, and we don't have that kind of balance thing. And then we started doing the build, and then it became much more expressive geometrically. The typology becomes much more radically. We really tried to change things, and that's how we basically evolved. And we never
the tightness
in our
and the
buildings
tension
again.
also really helps us. Like the fact that
Yes.
I think that the size of these lots and the fact that these are either infill or corner lots in a tight
Yes.
condition, it lends well to the way we think.
Maybe going back to by the way, I can feel with this question a little bit. They were always brilliant. Since 20 years ago. But back to this vernacular word.
Yes.
Maybe I have like two observations of this. By the way, such a wonderful lecture, right? Like, I think we've known each other for so long. This is the first time I've comprehensively listened to you talk about it. But I just never had a space to actually sit down and listen, which is so wonderful. And so I guess the first observation has to do with the idea of vernacular, right? But whereas, let's say the idea of vernacular could have been read as a stylistic trait, yours seem to be more of, let's say, close readings of typological conditions, or qualities of typology. Right?
Yes.
Like, I think, when you talk about Mansard, you're less so talking about the stylistic ideas of Mansard.
Yes.
You're talking about the qualities of Mansard, right?
Yes.
So I find that to be such an interesting way of approaching, let's say, observational architecture. Like you're kind of like being not so much contextual architects, but you're deconstructing the constraints.
Yes.
You're reading the rules to the bones. And it's not just the bureaucratic, like not just the kind of like qualities of bureaucracy, right? It's also the qualities of available construction technique,
Yes.
right?
That's
So that's one of the really amazing things that I find you're doing. The other thing, maybe less obvious, but throughout the lecture, I kind of like it kept coming up for me, which is like an undercurrent throughout the work, is the idea of misfitting or ill-fitting moments, right? Like I think, in fact, you let's say through one constraint or another, you find something that don't fit.
Yeah.
But then rather than let's say feeling bummed out that something didn't fit, you relish in the areas, in the
Yeah.
spaces that aren't fitting.
Yeah.
And you either deliberately manage those gaps that aren't fitting well, or you let it flourish spontaneously, right? At every scale.
Yeah.
And so that's maybe like the most part, like the ill-fitting or the misfitting. That part was so great. So there's no question. There's just like
no, but there is something that goes back to what Stephanie and I were teaching, and the question of how you. Sometimes it's a question of ill-fitting, but sometimes it's force-fitting to things that are not native to itself. And the studio that we were teaching was about, essentially, in the reduced version of it, was asking the students to take a plan of one building and a section of another one, and created a building. So these two were not native to each other, and imagine a third existing, which was the new building. And it takes a different kind of geometric intelligence, because geometry tends to having a dominant ordering logic that starts from a clean slate, but when geometry is reacting to given conditions, it's the best moment that geometry can help. It's not superimposing, it's trying to handle the force-fitted conditions between two non-native starting points. And there's a diagram that Stephanie did. I still show how you can play with, how you can transform each other to make it work. So generally they don't work unless you come up with a good solution.
Yeah, and your work has both. Like it has both the seamless and the seamed, and like celebrating those misfit moments, but also sometimes concealing them all together.
Yes, yeah.
And I think it'd be great for the students to hear about like how you make those decisions, like when you decide to seam something and when you decide to seamless something.
I've been thinking about this. Yeah. It goes.
Yeah.
I think the answer is we don't know, and it feels like fetish. And I noticed there was a moment that I really liked tangency, and there was a moment that I realized I really like cusp or kink, which is not a positional continuity. It's a moment that you expected tangential extension of something, and then there is an off moment. And so how in architecture we get to, it's definitely not us alone. You get curious to these about these things, and I think it's good to be aware that it's there's also a sentiment that at some point it may get exhausted, but we also kind of have remained committed to some of those tangential qualities that is kind of connected to the time that computer became actually available. Some of the tools that we have, we don't feel comfortable, because I think there was a brilliant knowledge in that body of work. Unfortunately, everything was going along just creating continuous surfaces. We like to just express that we come from that background, but we also now we like this continuity, or cusp and things. And I also, we live in an era that we don't acknowledge our discipline having those sentiments and those things, and we like to do that. Even the idea of going back to light wood frame construction, we realize we are, as architects, we love board form concrete. Like anything that is done in concrete, we just love it. And it doesn't make sense that why we don't like that. There's a problem. And now we're just working to bring its aesthetics out. So there should be a moment, and I think it would happen, that you can get something and start liking it for not exactly larger logic, but for its moment of existence right there. And that's the thing.
Yeah.
Do you ever disagree on what should create that register?
Can you explain more?
When you were talking about your tangential place, right?
Yes,
It's
yes, yeah.
tangential to something.
Yes, 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 yes.
So it creates a
Yes,
register. So I'm
yeah.
wondering what, like, do you ever find a moment where you're like, I think the register should be the street, but I think it should be.
Oh, I see, I see,
Oh,
I see what you're
us,
saying.
you're marital.
No,
okay.
no, 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 I think it should be symptomatic of a big problem.
Right.
So it shouldn't be a small move. It should be a condition of a site that meets something and you express it. This is not just a momentary thing. It's symptomatic of a fundamental problems of a force fitting of two things. And that's the moment that you can.
I think I like the fact that we use the term geometry and misfits and non-nativity and all of that, and leave it open, because I think it's as fluid. It's like, it's about geometry. It's just constantly changing. There were times that I was struggling with, Nima was really into these doubly curved surfaces.
Show it with your hand, because you were saying.
And oh my god, and then like moments of things going like underneath a stair, something, and I was working in Revit to try to make this a construction drawing set, and it was like, he was killing me. So that's why we stopped using Revit. But I think thankfully that is out of his system now. I think now he's moved on to, I don't know, we'll see where he moves on, but yeah.
So we're one of the few programs where landscape architecture and architecture need to be integrated across like more than one studio. And maybe just carrying off of the dynamic, like where are the points in which you come together and
No.
Nima's
Okay, I'm
arguing
gonna,
about
because I got my
landscape.
double curvature was attacked. I'm gonna quit.
Oh, don't go there. No. You're going there? Go ahead.
No, it's sometimes you need somebody at a distance, because the double curvature thing that Behnaz is saying is right. Like I notice, okay, I'm going too deep, and she passes by, so it's not a conversation. It's somebody just and you become aware. And I think the best moments that we get a good feedback is through a kind of immediate reaction of someone. And my I think the third landscape, this is the part that I think that we like this project. The idea of any kind, and this is it's an interesting topic. I think the idea of reading ecology. There is something about a history of our discipline which is about expression of the moment that our intention becomes visible, and appreciation of their landscape. At some point, it becomes too worried about the role and the authorship of a designer, and now we are in constant. That's why, and I think the best moment is what Behnaz herself did, which is overlaying it with the grid of bricks, which is porous, and then suddenly, so the radical juxtaposition is the better answer. So she was never convinced with shapes and figures of landscape, but she wanted that to be radical, and then she overlaid it. So it's a question of not to acknowledge that design discipline is about desires of authors, and just because we love.
I think yes. This is something we've been talking about all the time. It's like Nima's double curvature with me and spontaneity, but I
saw
think
it when we were setting up the lecture.
it's like, I feel like maybe landscape is different from architecture, that the will of the designer shouldn't be as visible. I think that was the problem of landscape before. That was always about, since 15th century, it was about like taming it or protecting it. And it was always like these imposed geometries, walls, fences, clear cutting. It was always about the will of the designer. Then came Ian McHarg, and then it became about let's zoom out and let's. So, and I like those systems, and I think the will would be like I didn't do the pavements to say the design. I disturbed the landscape, and I wanted to see what will come out of it.
That's a good, yes. There's a presence of you there. We like
Thank you. And I like spontaneous species because first of all, they're like immigrants. They're resilient, and they come from a different place, and they're here to stay. So let's just deal with it.
As long as you disturb them, we are together. Disturb them so you see their resilience.
I'm channeling Peter Del Tredici, by the way. I'm just
I mean, just because we're talking about spontaneity,
Yes.
and this, and also I sort of, in listening to the two of you, I am reminded of times in school.
Yes,
In a
of
different
course.
way, okay?
Yes.
Because earlier you were talking about landscape urbanism.
Yes.
And landscape urbanism at the time when we went to school was let's say,
thing.
the spirit of the times
Yes.
of that building, right?
Yes.
Like everyone in that building, whether it's architecture, urban design, landscape architecture, everyone was doing landscape urbanism
Yes.
in the school that we went
Yes.
to. But I think, the education of thinking about landscape urbanism has less, at least my perception of landscape urbanism, has less to do with, let's say, ecologies, but more to do with economics. And maybe the economics of ecology, if that makes sense, right? Like, I think the thing, if it's about shipping lanes, or if it's about, certain types of, let's say, minerals available, it's the available economics that will thrive, with or without disturbance, right? And so we're there really to observe the diagram of that economics and redraw that economics and allow the existing economics to grow. So that's kind of like when Behnaz was talking about spontaneity, that's how I heard it,
Yes.
right? Like identifying the economics, if that makes sense.
Yes.
But then it's also interesting because Scott Cohen briefly showed up in Toronto, and I feel like left
Huge.
huge dent. Like sometimes documentary.
Yes.
But I can also still see the staircase.
Oh, yes, yes,
I think,
for sure.
I think for those who are not, I mean, Stefan definitely knows Scott, but he did this lecture where he spent about 2 hours talking about handrails. But it was so brilliant because he was saying that this is the physical manifestation of circulation that you get to build as a drawing, right?
Yes.
The handrail is not like a thing that guards somebody from falling down. It's a three-dimensional drawing that traces how you move, right? So
That's why I have it.
nice.
It's a brilliant. That's how you get a dent.
No, but I still see this conversation sort of taking really far, right? Like from both ends.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Here we go. Oh, sorry.
I kind of missed it, but you're talking about the water pump that brings the water up.
Can
you tell me how that works?
You have to go to the alluvial, like you have to go to source of water it's usually at the bottom of the mountains like you guys have here. You have to tap into that and then you slope it down, and the horizontal pipe, if you look at it, it's sloping down gradually. It doesn't have to be much. It slopes down throughout, and then you'd have these these wells that are narrow, so the water would go up. It's physics.
But you have. Yeah.
I'm not.
But the well itself, it's not like the water towers in New York. They are already above the reservoir, and you only get it above certain level. The water is actually always below grade, and then you have to pump it up.
Yeah.
Or in traditional canals, they basically
like
They take a
barrel.
rope and barrel and bring it up. But the water is, you carry the water to your spot, but you have to pump it up.
Mhm.
I think is that called a capillary event?
No, it's not a capillary.
No, it's not. It just it doesn't go up. It just comes to a
Yes.
well, so you
Yes.
can put your the barrel in and get it.
I guess I'm just interested also in your relationship to the people in the neighborhood. You said you design often in one neighborhood,
Yes.
or you decided to do that after the project.
Yes.
And I'm just curious about, I guess, simply like what is your relationship to the people that live there, how you spend your time there, or how that evolves into your process.
it's part of the character of the neighborhood. We noticed that this question of when you are walking in the neighborhood, you see, oh, that house has an architect. Like, it's this is a neighborhood that if you stand out as, oh, the architect, or that house as the art, it's not good. So it's a neighborhood that you have to know if it's too designed, they don't like it. But at the same time, they're open to, you know, modes of dwelling that is not standard or is not established. So it's a very, I would say, in terms of just the relationship to architecture, not as, you know, and the neighborhood also has a good politics, but I'm just saying it's not but the fact that architecturally it's not a neighborhood that you don't want to be too much of an architecture statement, but the same, and that's a good thing for architecture at this point. So that's
Yeah, I'm getting flashbacks to some of our shared desk crits. Nima and I talked together for a couple of years, and we get into kind of long discussions.
Yes.
Is something going to be tangent, or is there a kink, or is there a cusp, or, you know, or is it some compound of the two? And yeah, I guess you could say it is a kind of suppression of an obvious desire, or something that's too on the nose, but in a way it's also kind of acknowledging kind of history of architectural desire.
Yeah. Yes.
Like from the digital and before, and then into now, where we really have to confront, you know, kind of multiple discourses together.
Yes.
And I think, you know, just I learned so much from that process. So I just want to acknowledge that. And
And I also, one thing, because Cooper Union format of teaching is co-teaching, and one thing that sometimes you realize, and you always teach with new faculty, and there's always this, you know, it's a thing, it's like designing together, and how can you do that? And I remember the moment that I realized, everybody told me that before we started teaching, everybody said, oh, Stephanie, you guys aren't going to be good. But but it still doesn't mean that we would be good. But the thing that I realized the moment that we would be good is whatever we said, Stephanie never let it to be a kind of a verbal thing. She always drew, like she said, okay, let's bring it. And that's things, words and lines are, you know, they have relationship, but you have to get it right. And
You kind of touched on this a little bit, but do you have any advice for us as students in this, at this point in time? Like now that you've worked, you know, you've taught a bit, and you're in with your practitioners, like what advice would you have for us?
you know, it's learning architecture is because I went to that program, and Iman is absolutely right. One studio suddenly, you know, touches you in ways that you always carry the thoughts of that studio. And I today, and this you know, in respect to that, today I came here and I realized, because I think Jimenez didn't do, he did something similar to this, but Italia said. But I came here and I got the vibe, and I realized that period in his life, in that short period of doing that internship there, had an impact on how, you know, he performed professionally later on. And I just checked it with him, and he said it's true. So it's not just an impression. So architecture is an odd thing. How you learn, you have to be, you know, you have to immerse yourself in the culture in multiple aspects, from, you know, building to drawing to reading, and you have, once you are in that culture, that moment would happen along the way. It's hard to say for everyone something.
Yeah, I think you have to muster the love for hour-long discussion over a cusp versus you have to really, you if the moment that you look at the time and it's 2 hours in, you're still discussing a moment in architecture, you're getting it right. It's about the joy of it. Like when we do this type of drawings in landscape, and I always tell my students to Bob Ross it. Because like he has had horrible paintings, he rest in peace, but he had this joy of drawing. Like he's just like this little, this happy tree. So I think you have to find the joy, and then like go down the rabbit hole.
That's a great note to end on. Thank you so much.
So we should have done that. No, because Imenez said that you should. We said it's so cozy, it's so cool. But just get the mic and say, what is it? What's up, Phoenix? I say yeah.
There's wine up there. I think we have to
You could also
stack
go
up
to
Stephanie, should I delete this or are you okay with it?
I'll take care of it.
That was good. Do you need? We don't have the earphones here. It's not included.
Can I keep the?
I don't know how she's doing.
Oh yeah, no. Everyone sees.
I want to do what you're doing.
Yeah.
And I feel like I should. No. I think this is probably the one place that's like totally